So it's all for play for still.
I think so. Do you want to bet against us?
There's the first edit anyway. Forgot to put us up on screen. Hello, Villa fans, and welcome to For the Love of Paul McGrath podcast. And for a different type of podcast, and for a lot of you guys who watch this podcast, we love books about Aston Villa, all types of books and from all different corners of, I suppose, of the literary world. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have somebody you guys are probably familiar with. It's Ivan McDouall I was talking to us today about a book, his book that he has written, not just any book, a book that he has written called Only the Real Thing, which catalogues Aston Villa's love affair with the Coca-Cola Cup in the mid-90s, a time, I think, the halcyon days, as I referred to them just off screen there a moment. I think of most recent Aston Villa fandom, I suppose. Last time we've won silverware. So absolutely delighted to have you on here, Ivan, and delighted to chat to you about this book, which comes out on the 3rd of March as well, and we will look at where you guys can get your hands on this book as well in a moment. But thanks very much for joining us today, Ivan. I'm looking forward to
Thank you for having me, Neil. Thank you.
Not at all. Excellent. Like, as I said, a lot of people's Aston Villa fandom was formed 92 to 96. I'm guilty as charged on that one too. Yeah. 1992 being when I started to follow Aston Villa, late 1992, bordering on 1993. And you know what? I thought we'd always be at that crack, winning silverware and getting to Wembley and challenging for titles and stuff. But you don't know what you got till it's gone, really, do you?
You don't. You know, when you think about that, when I think about being at Wembley in 1996 and with my dad, and if I'd have said to him at the time, oh, we won't win another trophy for 30 odd years, you'd have thought you were mad. It's just like, this is our second trip to Wembley and in 2 years, we've won it again. Yeah, like a real, I think like genuinely, Neil, like a really defining time for perhaps like our generation of Villa fans. And I think that, often obviously the massive history of the club around the European Cup, like that I was just born, in 82. So for me, this was, and Matt Kendrick often says this from the Claret and Blue, is that, it was like our Rotterdam a little bit, 94 and 96. And I think that's why the book was a real like labor of love for me, because it absolutely defined my Villa fandom, and that continues to this day. And yeah, to sit here now and like we haven't won a trophy since 1996. That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of people out there shouting at the screen going, what about the Peace Cup? What about the Peace Cup that we won?
The Intertoto. We won the Intertoto.
Intertoto, yeah, as well. But what I love about this as well, and this book is, and I think, look, even our love for that era of football and us saying, we thought that we win more than we have over that period of time. I think it's a lovely microcosm for, I suppose, the shift and transition to what the Premier League brought to the game of football, the transition to modern football, how some teams were left behind. And I think Aston Villa were one of those teams as well. And, what has become the juggernaut that really is English football at this moment in time. Those days, 94, 96, you Tranmere Rovers in the semi-final, and where Tranmere Rovers, they're not even a league team at the moment. I think they're in the conference, so football comes at you fast, and that's why it's lovely to look back at these books. But this book does have a tinge on the transition to modern football as well, doesn't it? Do you want to talk to us?
Yeah, it does.
About that?
Yeah, it does. And I think that actually, even between 94 and 96 was quite a change. And if you think of, Big Ron in 94 and the team that he had was, that very beginning of the Premier League era. Whereas compared to 96, Brian Little, a little bit more sanguine about things, 5 at the back, all this sort of, so they were very different eras, even within that 2-year period. And the book talks about this a little bit, but I think that even like the players, because there were only 3 players who played in both finals. And I think you saw that that shift really in terms of where football was kind of going, I guess, particularly around maybe international players. And obviously Mark Bosnich played in '94, but by the time we're in '96, we're talking about Savo Milosevic, and I mean that was, if you'd have said in '94 we're signing a Yugoslavian who wears a bandana allegedly, you thought you were mad, but 2 years later, that was where we were at in terms of kind of English football. So I think it's the two wins should be celebrated together, but actually are very different in terms of exactly where we were as a kind of footballing culture.
Yeah, and that's actually that's interesting you say that, because there is very much that feeling. We'll talk about, I suppose, our own memories in '94 and '96, because it's always nice to get into nostalgia and that aspect as well. But it does show that even the shift from '94 to '96 does show that the arms race in English football was hotting up, and it was it was exploding at that stage, as you said there. I think that is a good point. We had gone from signing maybe players that would come into the squad. And look, I don't know how much some of the players would have cost in the '94 team, but you might have signed a player from, I don't know, we'd say Coventry for 800,000, and he might have come in and become a mainstay in your team. Fast forward 3-4 years later, you get to '96, you're signing Savo Milosevic for 3 million from Partizan Belgrade. That's inflation. There's a big jump in, but there's a big jump there in the spending power, in the borrowing power, in the future view of what clubs could be, and the money magnets that they were going to become at that period of time. And look, that's not slowed down. We're here at the moment where they're trying to rein it in with PSR, but you still have teams that are supposedly in PSR trouble that are spending 200 million in January. So
yeah,
if little did we know back then.
Well, I think you're right, and it was a huge shit. I mean, like Ray Houghton's an example. Villa, Atkinson, brought him in, to solve a little bit of a problem, really, in kind of midfield. I think it was 700,000 from Liverpool. But then you think 2 years later, Brian Little did the same with Mark Draper from Leicester, and it was just over 3 million. So even in that space of time, that exponential kind of growth of transfer fees, and I think you kind of see it in other things. Now, hopefully people don't think I'm trying to kind of tie too many loose ends together. But even if you think about sponsorship, 94, all right, Muller were a kind of relatively big brand, but the 96 AST computers, although we probably hadn't heard of them, were actually a massive global brand. And the kit suppliers, we went from Asics to Reebok and things like that. So you could just see, I think, like a big difference as football was really beginning to change. And I think that's why, as probably as Villa fans in '96 when we beat Leeds, I was kind of like, well, all this is kind of ahead of us, and it's probably taken 30 years to maybe be where we thought we might be at that point. So.
And there is still, to this day, there is nobody will convince me ever, and I will go to my grave saying this, that AST Computers didn't just sponsor Aston Villa because AST, ONVILLA. Like, it was the perfect match made in heaven. And if that wasn't AST reaching out to Aston Villa going, this is becoming a global brand, there's lots of eyes on this, we got to get our name on a team. It'd be stupid to have it at Liverpool, even though they probably would have got more eyes at the time, at that period of time. And plus, there was no one going to move Carlsberg off their jersey, and they went, Aston Villa Aston Villa. Yeah, I remember remember being in school and I was wearing the AST jersey, and one of the older kids in school threatened to get a Tipex pen or get their Tipex and write the ON on my shirt as well. So I remember that. Yeah.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, Neil? Like, iconic kits, and there's a reason for that. Both the '94, I mean, you go to Villa Park now, and there's plenty of people in the Muller kits. Both the home and the away, the green and black, and then equally the '96, like the blue away, which is a classic one for me. But you think like that. This is like a defining period, and I guess it's partly because we haven't necessarily won trophies since, but I think it's it's just a massively important part of, I suspect, a lot of our generation's kind of Villa fans sort of existence. But equally, that kind of next generation, I was been lucky enough to go to a few events around the 30th anniversary of the '94 win, and meeting people like Neil Cox and Steve Froggatt, and you go and you think it probably people my age, but actually there's people a lot younger than me as well, because it's part of our history, and I think massively should be celebrated. So hopefully the book does that a little bit.
Absolutely. You mentioned something there, and sorry to go off topic. That blue jersey, that blue AST jersey. If you close your eyes, what name do you see in the back of it? You know, there's always a name. Like, obviously for me, when I see the '94 jersey, it's McGrath 5 in the back. It's always going to be that. But I don't have
think I'm
McGrath
go
5 on the back of that
Andy
other
Townsend,
jersey.
I think.
Do you have Townsend? I have Tommy Johnson when I close my eyes. I have Tommy Johnson on the back of that shirt, and I don't know why. It's mad. And it's mad. Like, and I've had this conversation with people. Granted, I've had this conversation 12 points in the back of the Aston Inn. Usually when I have this conversation, but it is. Close your eyes, think of a certain shirt. What name do you see in the back? And some people have weird and wonderful names. They go, yeah, I associate that shirt with Sasa Churchich or something like that. And you're like going, okay, right. Well, that wasn't on my bingo card at all.
Our own histories.
Yes. And that's the reason. You could do it with those two shirts. If I was to say, close your eyes and remember the claret blue jersey that had the black zigzag tire mark kind of lines down the front of it. I think it was 1997, and it had the kind of the collar. It was
like a V-neck, was it? Yeah,
it was a V-neck. I loved that shirt. I wore it until it actually fell off me. And when I close my eyes, you see Collymore in the back of it. But you ask people about that, and they go, "Jesus, I don't even remember that shirt." But it's because because people remember those other two shirts from winning that makes them iconic, and the names in the back. Throws up. I had somebody say to me as well about the '96 one, Graham Fenton. That's what they see on the back of it, and I'm going, yeah, exactly. Of course, sure. He was a big part of this, part of the story. And that.
Well, I mean, probably if Villa hadn't have won in '94, no one would remember Graham Fenton. I would say. I mean, I say, apologies to Graham in a sense, but he was such a left field choice for that final, because I mean, Ray Houghton was probably a bit aggrieved that he didn't play, and Fenton was brought in to kind of playing almost like a bit of a sort of a modern day 10 role, really, and he pushed Daly out to the left, Tony Daly on the right. But Fenton was kind of, he'd been a bit part player, but it was a massive shock. And to be honest, he never really massively played for Villa in any great sense after that, and was, then obviously left. But you think again, like from a player's point of view, like what a defining moment for him, to be part of that winning side. And again, I'm a big believer. I talk to people all this time about like all these players, like a part of our fabric as Villa fans. And whether you played 1 minute or, like Gareth Barry, hundreds of games, like you're part of that story. And I think that's what I loved about kind of writing a book, is those memories of like, not only people like Fenton, but players like Brian Small, Neil Cox, who weren't the stars, but you know what, they were absolutely part of the fabric of the club at that time, and that's just like an amazing thing, I think, to be as a Villa fan.
Absolutely, and like if I remember, like 1994, Steve Froggatt. Steve Froggatt was an exceptionally talented footballer.
Yeah,
like a proper winger. He really was, and it's just like we don't forget them, and history doesn't forget them, and the club doesn't forget them, and stuff like that. But you mentioned it being at the 30-year anniversary and seeing the likes of Neil Cox and Steve Froggatt. But for me, it's important that these books are being written, and that this book has been written by you in particular, to make people realize that football wasn't invented 10 years ago. There was marauding wingers. There was jinky wingers. There was fellas who could whip a ball in better than as good as David Beckham. They were just around before television was 24/7 with football. And it's really important to remember and immortalize those guys too as well. And, as I say, I was very young watching the Villa in 93 and 94. And, I might only get to see like 3 games a year on TV. But you get your sticker book, you get your Panini sticker book or something like that, and you get to know all the players and you feel like you know them inside out. And then when you watch the game, it's like they're jumping off the page and becoming real life to you, and that was the time, that was the age of football that it was. Were you at the '94 Cup final? I was at 96.
Yeah, I was at both. I haven't told you this before, Neil, so I should probably just say I was actually. This is slightly an odd one. I was actually mascot at the '94 final.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
I know, yeah. That sounds almost made up, doesn't it? But yeah, I want to. Do you remember Shoot magazine?
I do. I remember.
Yeah,
I was a Match magazine fan mostly, but I would always buy Shoot. Yeah, Shoot was great.
I think I was
great for
probably
posters.
both, but
great for posts.
Shoot did a competition like throughout the years of the Coca-Cola Cup. In fact, so there's probably some guy out there who was the '96 mascot, but they ran a competition where you had to enter at the start of the season, and to be the mascot if your team got to the final. So I entered it. And then, obviously we got to the final, and had a phone call from someone from Coca-Cola saying, "Yeah, well, you're
excellent.
You've won." And like, what? So had the immense pleasure of walking out with Kevin Richardson that day. Yeah. And I mean, fair play actually. I mean, he really looked after me that day, and obviously met all the other players. But mind you, again, just as sort of anecdotal, one of these events. I met Kevin again, and it was Dean Saunders was also there, and not that I somehow expected Kevin Richardson to remember me, but I felt the need to say to him like, "Oh, I walked out with you that day," and he said, "Oh, this is great," and then Dean Saunders was sat next to him. He said, "Hey, Dino, this guy was the mascot," and Dean Saunders looked at me and thought, "You're too old to have been the mascot that day." I won't repeat exactly what he said, but So yeah, and it was and still weirdly the only Villa game my mum has ever been to was that night
to see you,
because I was to see me walk out. And I always remember this is a terrible family anecdote. My sister came as well, and I was quite emotional at the final whistle, and we were stood on our seats. We were quite near the dugouts, and then I was quite emotional, when they were picking the trophy up, and my sister was laughing at me, and I just pushed her off her seat. I always remember. So yeah, very, very, very lucky in that sense. But then was there in '96, and my dad took me in '96 as well. And as I said earlier, if you'd have told me then that I've been lucky enough to see Villa at Wembley since, but not to win a trophy. And I think that when I thought about writing the book, it was about that idea of just how important it is to see your team win something. I don't know if it was sort of around this time last season with the current Villa, and then there was a lot of debate about what people wanted, whether it was would you win the Conference League or would you finish fourth in the table and qualify for the Champions League. And obviously we all know what happened, but it became this idea, and I talk about this in the book, about the choice. It was like people were talking, all over social media, on podcasts like yourselves, like, well, what would you choose? Like, do you want to win the trophy or do you want to qualify? And for me, if I'm honest, it was always about winning the trophy. Like, I would have absolutely adored winning that Conference League, because I think having seen us win trophies, you just understand what that means. Now, that was at the time. Obviously, I've had a great season following Villa in the Champions League, so there's lots of positives as well. But I think
it was a win-win situation. I remember those arguments. It was like, it's a win-win situation. Either way, we're going to be bloody beaming from ear to ear. I know one is probably more preferable than the other, and one's more iconic than the other. But it's a good problem to have if you're arguing about winning a cup competition for.
But can you imagine, Neil? Can you imagine if we win the FA Cup this season? Can you imagine?
Like my father, I started following Aston Villa because I did, and he was even a later convert. So I started following him in '92. Probably picked up the mantle maybe around '96, I'd say, as well. And he just started because football wasn't big in Ireland. We used to get 3:00 games all the time in Ireland. But when I say it wasn't big, it was big. And my dad was a football fan, but he didn't have a Premier League club, if that made sense. He used to kind of follow Walsall because it was the only place he had ever been outside of Ireland. He went over. It's a long story, but he wasn't supposed to go over there, and he was staying with his aunt at the time, and there was another one of her sisters was sick, or her sister-in-law was sick, and she lived in Walsall, and she basically just packed him up and said, "You have to come to Walsall because I have to go there straight away. So like he was like, oh, what the hell? So he ended up over in Warsaw for a weekend and came home, and that was the only time he'd ever left Ireland until he was about, I'd say he was about 45 then after that, So he kind of went, oh, I think I follow Warsaw kind of a situation, because he'd been there, and he didn't have to go too far. Didn't have to go too far to find for me to find my love, But geez, I can't even remember where I was going with the story. At that stage. Oh yes, so I started following in '92, but as the as the kind of how would I say that Villa were big news then. They'd nearly won the league in '92. '93 was a bit more fallow. '94 was the League Cup. '95 was we were still up and around the top echelons. We were never going to win the league. '96 then was winning the cup. So Villa were big news at that time, and it never really caught on really where I was from. It never really did. And I've always said this, I was the only Villa fan in the village for a good period of time, and I actually wore that as a badge of pride and a badge of, I always kind of zigged when everyone else was zagging anyway, because every second person is a Liverpool fan or a United fan in Ireland. So
sure.
So it's like they're just having conversations about these just really brings it back. Oh yes, and what you were saying, sorry, now I remember what I was going to say. I was waffling there when I was trying to remember what I was going to say. But my dad and myself had this conversation only last year about that as well. And my dad goes, you can't drink out of a league table, but you can drink out of a cup. That's why you should always want to win the cup. That's what he said.
That's not a bad sentiment.
Profound, Dad. Profound.
Yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? Like, like if if we'd have been having this conversation this time last season, I would have absolutely said I want to win the Conference League, and I want to have that wonderful night in Athens, all those sorts of things, but. It's easy in hindsight to say that, isn't it? I guess now we've had a great season, but I just think that those trophy wins absolutely they vindicate you as a fan. Like, they give you that moment, And I mean, my son's 13. I've been taking him to Villa Park since the first season in the Championship. And he's had this great journey as a Villa fan, from watching us play Rotherham and Barnsley to watching us play Bayern Munich at Villa Park. And that's wonderful. But I kind of wish for him, I just would love, like, he's now the sort of age I was in 94, 96. And just to have that, like, that moment in time where you watch your captain lift the trophy, I think is just, can't beat it. Can't beat it for me.
You can't. Absolutely. Oh, I'd be selfish if I didn't ask you. Wouldn't be selfish, should I say, if I didn't ask you this. But you told me beforehand that there's a little chapter in the book there that might resonate with a lot of Irish fans as well, because not only was I following Aston Villa and thought we were on the cusp of a wave and up on cloud nine, but also the Irish football team were half decent back then, and they were littered with Aston Villa players.
They were, yeah. So you're right. There is a chapter in the book, and it's really important moment for me, actually, as a kind of football fan, like, but being related to Villa. And I think that it was USA 94. So it was the summer after we'd won the first Coca-Cola Cup in 1994. England hadn't qualified for the World Cup. Ireland had, and obviously 4 massive Villa players were in that side. So Andy Townsend, Ray Houghton, Steve Staunton, and Paul McGrath. And I think, like, for me, it was like an extension of being a Villa fan, to be honest, Neil, that summer. Because I was supporting Ireland entirely based on the fact that there were these 4 Villa players, and not just. Let's be clear they're 4 iconic Villa players, really, aren't they? I mean, you can't, as a quartet. So I think it was just an amazing summer of, again, kind of building on that idea of, when we kind of get nostalgic about stuff and think about, oh yeah, that trophy win, but then following into that summer and following those 4 Villa players that were in that 94 side, obviously the particularly famous win, against Italy at a giant stadium, but then all those, that very hot day, and Big Jack in his white baseball cap, and John Aldridge shouting on the sideline, all that. And I think I'm always really interested in this idea about how we kind of, those links to being a Villa fan that extend beyond just Aston Villa in a sense. And I think USA 94 was a brilliant example of that. And I mean, well, I'm sure you must have some very fond memories, even as a young man, of being those. Well, yeah, there we go. There we go. You know, and I mean, Paul. I mean, Paul McGrath in that Italy game was just exceptional, wasn't he? I mean, he was just, there was nothing was getting past him, and you know, and again, it's that sort of shared love. Like we used to see that, we used to see that every week, pretty much, you know. But it was just that I loved the fact that people were talking about, you know, Villa's Paul McGrath, you know, and I think exceptional.
And that's funny, Ivan, because I don't know. I can't speak for any other clubs, specifically any other clubs our size, but our fan base has real affiliation to the players that we have. Like I find myself watching international games. I'm not a lover of international football in 2025. Be honest with you, I'd sooner detach and detox from football an awful lot. Like I don't call me unpatriotic. It's tough to watch the Irish football team at the moment. So, but there are times where I would find myself maybe watching, turning on, you know, another nation's game. Like I might watch the Netherlands in the upcoming internationals to see how Malin's getting on, or I'll try on Belgium. And say, oh, Nana's starting out great. Oh, Nana Tielemans, yeah, I want to see how that goes on as well. And I think Villa fans, you know, you have this affinity with your players, and I think we're, I'm not going to say we're more proud than other teams of our players, but I think we're more appreciative at times that when we've got good players, we want them to do well, and we want them to stay with Villa. We want them to do extra well then when they go abroad, so that we can puff our chest up and go, he's ours, like we did it with Douglas Luiz.
Well, yeah, well,
guy, he's ours. He's playing for Brazil.
In some way, it's representing us, isn't it? You know,
Course,
and I think the best example for me is when Emmy won the World Cup for Argentina.
Of course,
like I mean, I was just like almost almost overcome with emotion on his behalf that he'd done this phenomenal thing, you know. And his own story is obviously a book in itself that someday someone will write. But like, what a moment as a Villa fan. And you know, I mean, obviously England played in that tournament, you know, but I didn't have any great investment in England. You know, I wanted Emmy to win, you know, and when they did, you know, it was just, and what a proud moment. It sounds daft in some ways, doesn't it? But what a proud moment as a Villa fan that your goalkeeper has just won the World Cup. And I think you're right. And I think it's difficult. You know, I'm sure that other fans might say this, you know, from other clubs, but I do think we are appreciative of those links, you know. And I think you look at, you know, and I mean, you're someone again who sort of tweets some of the stuff around kind of loan players. You know, we follow loan players. Like I've got lots of friends who are fans of other clubs, and if I said, oh, you know, how's so and so getting on at Stockport County this season, they'd look at me like I was mad. Whereas I could say, oh, you know, Louis Barry scored 3 goals, you know, before he then came back and went off again. But I do think, you know, we are as a club quite appreciative of that kind of those links, you know. And I think, again, hopefully the book tries to capture some of that in terms of that period of time. And I think USA 94 is a prime example of that, you know.
Yeah, excellent. We spoke small bit about the 94 final, obviously, you know, getting Fenton and that curveball that came out of nowhere. About the 96 final, like you mentioned that there was a massive squad overhaul. Obviously, there's only 3 players played in both. You know, you've got Gary Charles, you've got Fernando Nelson, you've got Mark Draper, as you mentioned before. Talk to us a bit about where the book touches on that final in the 96 game.
Yeah, well, I think that transition, I think, was really important. So the 3 players that played in both were Bosnich, McGrath, and Townsend. But I think it's that idea of just how much that transition of sort of playing style as much of anything. So the shift from, you know, like a very traditional, almost kind of 4-4-2, or the albeit 94 final sort of tweaked that a little bit, to then that Little's 5 at the back. So Southgate, Ehioga, McGrath as a kind of 3 centre backs, which to me was an outstanding lineup. You know, I mean, Hugo is a huge hero of mine, and you know, incredibly missed. But it was around in 94, but was kind of more of a, you know, in and out. Missed a penalty in the Tranmere semi-final, but then by '96 had very much he was the main man, and I think that the introduction of Southgate, who had been a midfielder at Palace, and Little saw him as more in this back three, I think very much changed the way that Villa played.
And ahead of its time as well, bringing a
Yeah.
midfielder back in because he wanted a ball player in there,
Yeah.
Fast forward 30 years and they're still looking to do that. The opposite way. Moving defenders into midfield.
That's not to be underestimated, Neil. That kind of that Brian Little was a very forward-thinking manager. That idea, and the idea of wing backs, the idea that players that could get up and down. So Gary Charles, Alan Wright on the other side, who's still a fairly regular fixture around Villa Park at the moment. It massively made people think about the way that things happened, and I think Townsend was a really important part of the continuity between the two teams, because he was such an outstanding midfielder, and I think that really kind of anchored that midfield three, where the likes of Mark Draper could perhaps have a little bit more license to create. And then they were such an inventive side. I mean, this is kind of niche stuff around the cup run, but I mean they played Stockport at Villa Park, and I don't know if you remember, but Townsend flicked the ball, a free kick, flicked it up, and Draper volleyed it in. And they were an inventive side, and then of course led by Dwight York's goals. And again, Little has huge credit for that, for me, because York had been at Villa for a long time. It was Graham Taylor that had brought him in, and he was, me and my dad used to go. My dad used to say to me, like, "Why didn't York play up front?" And he never really did. He was always sort of out on the wing, and Brian Little gave him that onus to say, "Right, you are my main man." A bit like Ollie today, you're my main man. You're going to play. You're going to play through the middle. And God, what a player, Neil! What a player!
Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, what a player is right. You mentioned about Townsend there, and I often think, and I remember, how good he was in that year in '96, and especially in that final. I thought, he was a player again who was ahead of his time. He was a player that would be, if you plopped him into a team right now, people would be like, they raved about him in '96 as a good player, because everybody could see the talent he had. But gosh, he's suited to 2024, 2025 football.
Yeah.
Just his range of passing, his ability to, his positional discipline, his ability to, as you said there, him in the team made other people more creative and better because of the safety blanket he wasn't. He didn't need to go to ground. He wasn't that type of player or anything like that. But he was just so positionally disciplined and so good at just distributing the ball properly on time, at the right pitch, the right pace. He was just fantastic. He was a fantastic player, and I think he's underrated.
Goals, I think you're right. Like when I in sort of a later eras, when people started talking about players being like box to box players, like Andy Townsend was the quintessential original box to box player to me.
Yeah,
like he was up and down, like huge energy, influencing both ends of the pitch. And massive kind of a link between those two sides, but incredibly important, I think, in particularly with Little having to kind of refashion the side. I think he needed some stability, and obviously McGrath gave him that, and Bosnich. But I think Townsend as captain was very much the fulcrum of that. So it was 96 was different, and I think that probably. I mean, you mentioned Tommy Johnson earlier, like massively important in the run, but obviously didn't play in the final. Ian Taylor essentially played, who is a bona fide club legend as well. Obviously scored one of the three goals. But there's a really great story that Brian Little tells, which I mentioned in the book, about the fact that when Taylor scores in the final, the first person he runs to on the sidelines is Tommy Johnson, and that whole atmosphere, I think, in the squad was just fantastic, in the sense that I'm no doubt Tommy was disappointed not to start at Wembley, but it was about more than that, and it was about the journey that they'd been on as a team to really kind of a bit more battle through to that final, and then eviscerate Leeds, really.
Exactly, and that was a result that a lot of people saw coming prior to the game. I remember. So your memory of that '96 game, like, see, this is why I can't write a book. Well, I probably could, but my book wouldn't be as interesting as yours being at the game. My memory of that was I got up early that morning. My grandmother was living with us at the time. No, so, sorry, she wasn't, but she'd come over early. So the whole lot of my family, we live rural in a place called Limerick, in Ireland. But all my family were like, right, the day is geared around this game. Neil wants to watch it. I wasn't the most trusting young man when I was at that age. I was only 11 years of age. So there was a key for our sitting room door. And the night before, sorry, everyone was gone to bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I got the key and I put it under my pillow. And I woke up really early the next morning, and it was whatever, I don't know. My grandmother then and my mother took me down to the shop, and I got a bag of popcorn. I think it might have been. I think that maybe we got popcorn we to make ourselves or something. And I got a big bottle of some fizzy drink. Anyway, I can't remember, but I remember the second I had the popcorn in the bowl and the second I had the drink, and it was maybe about 40 minutes to kick off, I ran into the sitting room with the key and locked the door from the inside. And they were banging on the door, and there was a big window at the front, and they were coming to the window telling me to open the door. And I didn't look at anyone, and I sat there and I watched the game on my own. After locking myself in, I was like, no, I don't trust anyone to come in and turn over. But little did I know, they had planned the whole day around me watching this game, because my bedroom was plastered in posters, and I had the home and away shirt. I was indoctrinated at that stage. There was no going back at that stage.
It was done.
But little did I know, I said, I can't take anything to chance here. Yeah. So I've got that's my memory of that day, and going absolutely loco when Milosevic scored that volley.
Oh yeah, well, Savo. I mean, gosh, that's a podcast on its own, Neil. Savo Milosevic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it was a very different emotion, I think, from 94 to 96, because 94 was, we were underdog. I mean, no one thought Villa were going to win that, I mean, United were a really, really strong side. Although I think, I always vividly remember, obviously I'm not, you might be familiar with the Sports Argus, but not ever having had it. But we used to, go and get the Pink on a Saturday night. And I always remember the week before, Schmeichel had been sent off for United, and the Sports Argus's main headline was Schmeichel to miss cup final. And there was just a bit of me that thought, oh, that's interesting, because, Schmeichel was just so fantastic. And obviously Les Seeley played for United in the 94, like, again, another rest in peace, Les. But, I think the 96 was, I think that because we'd beaten Arsenal in the semi-final, and again, we weren't favourites really to beat Arsenal. I think then when we got to the final, it felt a bit more relaxed, and not to the point where it was a given, but I certainly remember feeling more confident that day in '96 that we were gonna do it. And I think once Savo scored, it was pretty one-way traffic, really. I mean, Dwight's third goal was sort of late on, but it was just the icing on the cake, really.
Absolutely.
Very, very different emotions, I think, but both really important days.
Very important days. Like, we wouldn't be talking about it here for the last 38 minutes otherwise.
It's
important. Hopefully we've got a lot more. We touched more, I suppose, on your thoughts and your feelings of those events. Obviously, you've immortalized them in this book. And what I want to do is, just before we finish up, Ivan, I want to show people where they can get this book. As I said, the book is available on Amazon. You can buy it in any of those places, WH Smith, Waterstones, any bookshop that you can find. It's published by Pitch Publishing, and you'll be able to see it there. It's out on the 3rd of March coming, but you can obviously pre-order it as well. I have done so as well, and that's what it looks like. Only the Real Thing. Let me ask you about, obviously, the name Only the Real Thing comes from Coca-Cola, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it just coincidence?
It was their marketing slogan at the time. Coca-Cola, Only the Real Thing. So and fair play to the guys at Pitch. They've sort of recreated the font and stuff. So I think really, I'm really pleased with the cover. And obviously both managers on there, and the two captains. So Rico in 1994, and then Andy Townsend in '96. Both of whom, Neil, were man of the match. So the official man of the match was the captain on both days, which I think
Excellent.
probably underlines the importance of both of those players to those Villa sides.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, hopefully, Ivan, you'll be writing another book about this year's escapades, as there's a lot left to go within this year. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I'm a sucker for any Aston Villa books, and it's great to talk to the authors and see the passion that you have with regards to this book. And I know that people are going to go out and support you and buy this book and enjoy it, reliving those memories as much as I've enjoyed chatting them with you here today as well. So that's where you can find it, guys, there on pitchpublishing.co.uk. You'll also be able to find it, I think, Ivan, on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle, Ivan? You want to let the guys know?
Yeah, it's at Ivan_McDouall.
Perfect. Simple as that. And you'll be able to find it there. There's a link to it from your Twitter page as well.
Yeah,
so anybody who's interested.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be really interested, if people are reading it and just interested to hear people's memories, and of the 2 days. And I've been lucky enough to kind of have a bit of that so far, of people getting in touch and remembering certain things and kind of, quizzing me on certain, but who came off the bench in '94 and things like that, like testing me out. So, but yeah, I think it's really, really great to talk to you and important time for our club, and so one to celebrate.
Absolutely. No, and thank you so much for taking the effort to write it. A lot of people say I'd love to write a book, but there's a lot of dedication, a lot of effort, a lot of there's a lot of self-discipline and stuff like that. And right now, I've always said I'd love to write a book, but you get to the first paragraph and then you go, oh my God, no, I can't get to 288 pages like you did.
So I think in some ways this was. I'm not, I wouldn't want to go as far as say it was easy, but when you're trying to write about something that you love, is I'm fortunate to write about other things that maybe I don't love as much, which are probably harder, So, yeah. But yeah,
excellent.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
No, and thank you so much for popping on, and really, really appreciate your time as well and coming to us to chat about that. So everybody, find it on Pitch Publishing or find it on Ivan's Twitter page. There you'll be able to find a link to it. We will put a link in the description of this podcast as well, where you guys can go and find it. So hopefully you'll enjoy reading that book and reminiscing as much as we have tonight. So I think that's going to do it, everybody. Once again, thank you so much, Ivan, for dropping on, dropping in tonight. And we're going to be back with lots more podcasts over the coming weeks. And we were just saying before, myself and Ivan, it's like a steam train of games at the moment, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But it's nice to take a break from wondering about who's going to start at centre half and where the injuries are going, to talking about what we know and talk about great centre halves that we've had down through the years of McGrath, Southgate, and so on, and Lugo, and all those guys as well. So thank you once again, Ivan, for your time, and thanks everybody for watching and for listening. All that's left to say really is stay safe, stay healthy, and all that's left to say is up the Villa.
Up the Villa.